We're going to be seeing a lot more of this in the future.
This is the neighborhood of Brentwood in Burnaby, British Columbia. It's a heaping load of density located directly around a SkyTrain station. There's this nice public plaza, a grocery store, a handful of restaurants, some banks, clothing stores, pharmacies, entertainment spots, a few thousand housing units, and a really good pizza place.
It's not perfect, but it's a great example of what the future of the Lower Mainland could look like. You see, there's a plan, a vision to take neighborhoods like this and replicate them all across the region. But this time, the plan didn't come from the city of Burnaby. It came from the province, and they've made some big moves lately, all with the greater goal of potentially solving the housing crisis. Always wanted to say that. Wow. Hi, my name is Arden English, and I've decided that I want to talk about housing again. Where do I begin? Oh, right, I just mentioned this thing called
the housing crisis. It's the worst kept secret in Canada. The cost of ownership and the cost to rent have grown an unbelievable amount in recent years, and it's not super difficult to understand why. The population has continued to increase and will continue doing so into the future, but we haven't been building enough housing units to keep up with the demand. So an increasing number of people have all been competing for a smaller relative number of housing options. On top of this, the housing that we've grown accustomed to building over the past 80 years has been so space inefficient that some cities are running out of developable land.
This left municipalities with no choice but to build more housing in already established neighborhoods, which of course is a super popular thing to do. Let's be honest, people hate change, especially when it's in their neighborhood. So instead of building gentler density developments all over the place like duplexes and townhomes, cities were doing this. Cramming all the density into towers in order to preserve the character of the single-family home neighborhoods that take up anywhere from 70 to 85% of the residential land in our cities.
But of course, that's all controversial for its own reasons. There's really no winning here. No matter what gets proposed, someone will always have an issue. And the result of this backlash has been a continued fear of building enough housing for decades now, with cities making deliberate choices to downzone the places that make the most sense for growth.
It was clear the system wasn't working. It wasn't the buildings themselves that were the problem, rather the entire development process was basically shooting itself in the foot. Something had to be done. So the province stepped in.
Here's how it went down. In 2023, the big scary NDP housing minister Ravi Kahlon brought in the sledgehammer, declaring all single-family neighborhoods be eradicated and replaced by multiplexes and towers, all while Premier David Eby laughed maniacally in the back.
Or maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration, although according to some people, that's exactly what happened. Here's how it actually went down. A couple of bills were introduced to the Legislative Assembly, passed their first, second, and third readings and all that come in between, and officially became royal assent. Okay, I know this is but please save all your questions till the end.
What were the bills in question? Well, introducing Provincial Housing Bills 44 and 47.
Riveting names. I know, I thought the same thing.
There's also Bill 46, but that's kind of just the forgotten middle child. All it covers is development financing, which, while it is still important, would be far too complicated to cover in this video. So I'm just going to briefly mention it here so I don't get comments telling me I missed it, because I didn't. I'm purposely ignoring it for the sake of this video's simplicity, and if you got a problem with that, then you can take it up with me! Bills 44 and 47 both address very different forms of housing. Bill 44 legalizes small-scale multi-unit housing, also known as SMU. Essentially, it allows for any form of duplex, triplex, multiplex, townhome, laneway, or secondary suite to be built on any average lot that you would currently likely find a single-family home. More specifically, it allows for 4 housing units on all SMU designated lots and up to 6 units on lots located within a 400-meter radius of a bus stop along TransLink's frequent transit network, meaning along a route with service every 15 minutes or less. Bill 47, on the other hand, goes taller, much taller. It identified a multitude of so-called transit-oriented areas, or TOAs. Using the SkyTrain network as a basis, it allows for, at minimum, 8 stories within an 800-meter radius of a SkyTrain station, 12 stories within a 400-meter radius, and 20 stories within a 200-meter radius of a station. There's also relative floor area ratio stuff in there, but that's getting a bit too technical for what I'm looking to delve into here. 52 TOAs were designated to start, including most SkyTrain stations as well as some major bus exchanges across the province. Do note that those heights and proximities are lower when the TOA is only a bus exchange.
Rapid transit stations do warrant the highest of densities because they're capable of moving the most amount of people in the most efficient manner. It makes much more sense to build up in areas like Brentwood or Metrotown that have the rapid transit to support it, instead of, say, Willoughby and Langley Township, which currently doesn't. Although that is soon to change. That was quite the information dump. All this was a part of the Housing Statutes Amendment Act in 2023, brought forth by the Minister of Housing. And when it was brought forth, the reaction from councils around the province was expectedly,
"This is not going to help with affordability."
And to have this kind of one-size-fits-all legislation,
blanket densification,
Complete lack of consultation with our city.
legislation that really would lead to slum-type neighborhood.
No off-street parking. This community is going to go wild.
It could be catastrophic overdevelopment.
It will have a chaotic effect on where housing goes.
Looking at doubling the population of White Rock in 20 years.
When does a city like White Rock become full?
I don't think this was well thought out at all.
yep, it was chaos. It's like I said with redevelopments in general. There's no winning here. In this case, municipalities largely felt that their rights were being stripped away, that their residents were losing their voices, and that their councils and staff were losing control over their own future. Now, were they? We'll get into that later. Now, the province is well within its rights to do this. Municipalities themselves exist at the whims of the province, so technically, David Eby could just wake up one morning, snap his fingers, and decide we actually don't need 2 Langleys and 2 North Vancouvers and just merge them together. Actually, that's kind of a good idea.
So that's the setup. There's still much more to discuss surrounding these bills and what they mean for the future of British Columbia, but to learn more, I figured we'd go direct to the source. So I went home, threw on my nicest and seemingly only blue shirt, and sat down with the former Minister of Housing and Municipal Affairs who brought forward these bills, Ravi Kahlon. Curious to see how these bills came to be.
Well, we looked at the housing challenges we're dealing with the premise that it's not working. So we looked at it more of a holistic approach to it, as opposed to trying to address one item here and another item here. So we said, well, where do we need to start? If we have local governments right now that are collecting data, and all of them are collecting it in a different way, how do we compare one community to another to see who's actually doing well and who's not? So we started with the housing needs reports and we standardized them across the province. With that, we had a standardized formula of how they calculate what needs are in their community to 20 years. So now local governments are making decisions in a similar fashion, and we're able to actually compare how communities are doing.
These housing needs reports identify exactly what angle of the housing crisis this legislation aims to resolve: the supply side. Now, I'm not going to go into super fine detail as to how supply plays an important role in solving the housing crisis, because there are so many other videos that you can watch after this one that explain exactly that. Instead, I want to take a deeper look into this housing legislation to understand its benefits and its shortcomings, and ultimately to answer the question of if this is the right course of action to begin digging our way out of the housing crisis. Let's start back at Bill 44.
There's absolutely a need for more small-scale multi-unit housing in our cities. Not everyone wants or even needs a fully detached single-family home. Whether it's a recently engaged couple looking to start a family, a senior citizen that might have trouble with the stairs nowadays, or really anyone in between. These are real people in real predicaments that for the last 60 years or so have been suddenly forced into the same lifestyle through the same form of housing.
These people deserve to be able to keep their sense of community if they so please, without worrying about completely uprooting their lives to move somewhere else. And with the broad scope of housing encompassed in Bill 44, pretty much anyone can find exactly what kind of unit they're looking for. As an aside, for the longest time, building anything besides a single-family home on one of these lots would subject the builder to a lengthy and expensive rezoning process, from anything from a duplex to a townhouse complex to a high-rise condominium building. This is a major reason why this kind of housing just hasn't been built.
The demand is clearly there. The neighborhoods of smooth-style housing that have been built are being lived in, and by all kinds of demographics. So I don't want to see a single comment about how you can only raise a family in a detached house, because we are so far past that discussion. The benefits of Bill 44 are pretty straightforward and simple. It allows for a gentle increase in housing density pretty much anywhere, and in a way that, as many housing skeptics would say, avoids substantially changing the character of a neighborhood in a way that you could say the towers at Brentwood have. A prime example of the true potential of small-scale multi-unit housing can be found in the neighborhood of Southwood in Calgary. On the surface, it's a pretty unassuming mid-century single-family home neighborhood, but at a second glance, you'll find that many of the houses are actually duplexes. And in fact, as I continued exploring this neighborhood myself, I ventured down an alleyway to discover that many of the complexes were actually fourplexes. Southwood is a neighborhood that functions like any other. It doesn't demand substantially higher services than the lower density neighborhoods around it, and it's not in parking or traffic hell either. Garbage still gets collected, and people still go to school, visit the hospital, and live their lives. This is proof of concept of what Bill 44's built environment can be as it's built out over time.
Now, many people that are not fans of this bill will point to the fact that it removes the need for public hearings on any project that is in accordance with the pre-approved smooth zoning. They say that it's anti-democratic and then it strips the public of their valuable voice in the development process. Now, the broader issue of public hearings as a form of gathering input is a whole other topic in and of itself, and my buddy Yute has already made a great video on the subject on his channel about here. I highly suggest you check that out right after this video. But what I want to point out here is what specific housing we the public can and cannot speak our voice on right now.
Let me take you to my home city of White Rock, a city whose council and MLA have been very open in opposition against Bill 44.
I'm hearing that our public have been expressly forbidden from even sharing their comments on this.
With the point of removing public hearings being such a prominent critique here, I thought it would be fun for us to take a quick look at some of the most recent homes completed or being built across the city. If smooth homes are going to be such a disturbance that we must be able to speak publicly on each project proposed, then surely no other character-altering housing has been built in the meantime, right? Ha! No. Every house that I just showed you has been built within the last few years, and more importantly, the public could not comment on any of them, because they were all in line with the single-family home designation that was allowed in the zoning bylaw.
This is where I begin to see holes in these arguments against Bill 44. The neighborhoods are clearly changing already without any input from residents. Again, residents can't speak at a public hearing about any of these mini mansions popping up all over the place, even though these are clearly more catered to a luxury lifestyle than, say, this duplex across the street.
Now, you could look at this in two ways. One being that we should allow public hearings for every housing project on every lot, but most people would agree that's a waste of time. Again, watch the About Here video. But you could also just say, what's the point in subjecting every duplex, basement suite, townhouse, or other to the same development process as a high-rise complex? And honestly, I think you'd be surprised at just how well small-scale multi-unit housing can fit into existing neighborhoods. Seriously, walk around East Vancouver and count the number of different addresses across doors on one house. It's kind of crazy. Ultimately, if these lots are going to be developed into new homes without public input, you might as well use the land more efficiently to accommodate more people. There are simply too many cases of this working within Metro Vancouver, across the country, and around the world.
But there's a bit of an elephant in the room. I've been talking up how much easier this bill makes it to build these smooth-style homes all over the place, but in reality, we haven't actually seen a substantial shift in smooth homes built.
What we've seen instead is municipalities across the province opting to make their policies more restrictive against both SMU and TOA developments, really putting into question how seriously these cities are taking the housing situation. The province has set housing requirements for many of these municipalities to meet, but if some of these cities can't even get on board with SMU developments, then we might be approaching some interesting debates between the province and its municipalities. Alright, it's time to shift our focus back to Bill 47. I mentioned earlier that high-density development is the model for SkyTrain stations, but for every station like Brentwood,
you'll find a 29th Avenue station, or an Nanaimo station, or a commercial Broadway station, all of which come one after another along the Expo line in the city of Vancouver, and in the case of commercial Broadway, literally straddle the downtown. For even further context, commercial Broadway station has the third highest ridership in the entire SkyTrain network. It's the intersection point of the Expo line, the Millennium line, and the 99B line to UBC, notably the busiest bus route between both Canada and the US. But then compare it to the land use around the first and second highest ridership stations, and well, to say commercial Broadway has potential would be a colossal understatement. All of these stations have just as much, if not more potential than Brentwood or Metrotown, but are left practically unchanged since their construction in the 1980s. Remember, these stations are within Vancouver, the city that most commuters are traveling to because it has the most jobs, amenities, and events in the region.
This brings up an important caveat with transit-oriented development in Vancouver's suburbs. Just because we build a lot of housing along the SkyTrain network out there, doesn't mean the job density will follow to the same extent.
Here's a very useful graphic About Here used in his video on new downtowns, and I appreciate him allowing me to use it here. What it explicitly shows is that while most people that live in Vancouver happen to work in Vancouver, no other city in the region comes remotely close to matching that quantity of in-city commuters. Just looking at Burnaby next door is staggering, with between 50 and 70% of residents commuting outside of Burnaby for work. While we've tried to build this decentralized region with transit-oriented centers all over the place, the reality is the job market has yet to really shift with it. Almost every tower you see in Surrey Central, Lougheed, or Brentwood are purely residential, maybe with some mixed-use businesses on the bottom floor. So we build this housing, and it is lived in, but is it really the best place to be building it?
We have to work with what we already have, and what we have is a very prominent job market within the city of Vancouver. Deliberately choosing to ignore this fact in favor of broader regional growth is effectively choosing to solve the housing crisis by creating a transportation crisis.
And in practice, that's exactly what we've seen. Just look over at Surrey, where transit is practically at its breaking point. At peak times, the SkyTrain can be crushed along the entire Expo line from Vancouver to Surrey. And beyond that, so many of Surrey's bus routes are horribly overcrowded. It's gotten to be such an issue that buses have been taken off Vancouver routes and put onto Surrey routes, which, while it makes it a bit better for Surrey, it directly harms transit in Vancouver right now.
I'll leave that tangent at that because transit ridership and funding is remarkably complex. But I don't want the takeaway from this being that building housing outside of Vancouver is bad. That's not the case at all. There are still schools, venues, universities, and jobs all around the region, and people should be able to live where they so please. But there's so many people that wish they could live in Vancouver itself and skip most of that long commute.
When Vancouver doesn't build around their SkyTrain stations, the demand for that housing doesn't magically disappear. It just gets pushed farther and farther out into the suburbs. These new TOAs provide the city with the opportunity to embrace the commercial Broadways, Nanaimos, and 29th Avenue stations of the region. But there is one other issue with our transit-oriented development.
Even when we build these high-density residences around SkyTrain stations, it turns out people still tend to use their car if they have it at their disposal, which, when you're building a massive building like this, often means building a massive parkade like this.
You see, any development within a city has to meet that lot's minimum parking requirements. There's a ratio for how many parking spaces are needed per unit of housing being built, and naturally, as a building gets taller and denser, the more parking must be built alongside it.
Bill 47 has done away with the parking minimums within the TOAs. Reducing or eliminating parking minimums provides developers with the opportunity to incentivize residents to use the transit that they live next to, while conveniently saving loads on construction costs, because, as it turns out, digging several stories deep worth of parking is actually unbelievably expensive. Now, just because the parking minimums are gone within the TOAs doesn't mean developers aren't building any parking anymore. Quite the opposite, actually. There has been very little willingness to change despite the potential savings, but there are some notable developments that are encouraging precedents. Namely, the Ashley Mar Co-op redevelopment located in South Vancouver, with this 3-tower redevelopment having a parking ratio of 0.3. That's 3 parking spaces for every 10 units of housing on a project that has 54 co-op units, 71 added non-market units, and 524 market units. There's also the Sanak development on Reserve Land in Kitsilano with a parking ratio of 0.1. The people who will be living in these developments will be relying on public transit, supporting the case for improved transit access across the region, while truly embracing the potential of high-quality transit-oriented development within the city of Vancouver. Alright, quick recap. So far we've discussed the strengths, drawbacks, potential, and misconceptions of Bills 44 and 47. Now I'd like to briefly look to the future of what these bills could represent, and finally reflect on the contentious top-down planning approach that brought these bills to life.
Bill 44 is pretty well set in stone for what it will accomplish, permitting missing middle housing on single-family home lots across the province. But Bill 47 has a lot more potential to grow and evolve over time. There were 52 TOAs designated with this bill's inception, with a healthy variety of built environments included. But there are some notable bus exchanges missing that either already have decent density or are planning for it already, including Steveston Exchange, Park Royal, Carveth Exchange, White Rock Centre, and of course, the Tawasin Ferry Terminal. So what's the plan? Why were some of these major exchanges left out to start? And beyond that, what does rapid transit expansion like Broadway Subway, Surrey-Langley SkyTrain, and the bus rapid transit corridors mean for Bill 47?
Yeah, the legislation starts with a simple premise. If we're going to invest billions of dollars in infrastructure, there's an expectation that housing will come with it. And then the second premise is, if we're going to build housing, let's prioritize the housing near transit and encourage people to take the transit as opposed to all driving. And so, yes, we started with kind of the bigger bus depots. We started with the bigger transit spots, but I do think there's real opportunities for us to go forward. For example, bus rapid transit, it's coming, but we do need to wait for final investment decisions. We need to get a solid understanding of how many stations or how many stops there actually will be. And that will help us understand, well, how far apart are these stops? How often will the bus service be coming? So I do see some opportunities. And beyond that, I see opportunities in that Metro Vancouver has already regions and roadways that they've identified for future transit growth. And I think that we need to be able to find more housing opportunities there because the communities have already identified those areas as where they want the housing.
This is quite encouraging to hear. It encourages proactive planning and development along high-potential transit corridors, which might not be expecting SkyTrain level service for a while, but can still support the movement of thousands of people every day.
These are corridors like 41st Avenue, Hastings Street, Willingdon Avenue, and King George Boulevard. All of these are currently or are soon to be rapid bus or BRT corridors, which, while not being as flashy as the SkyTrain, are still very effective forms of rapid transit. Bill 47 recognizes that rapid transit is more than just SkyTrain. Buses of all kinds are still incredibly capable of providing great quality transit when they're given the right respect from cities. These corridors are nowhere near their highest potential, both in terms of population and transportation capacity, so it makes a lot of sense to plan proactively for future improvements to public transit where cities already expect it.
Alright, let's talk about the top-down planning approach. The fact that these bills were developed by the province and forced onto the municipalities was a very contentious aspect of this legislation, but is it really as big of a deal as it's made out to be? The question that can be used to answer this question is whether or not municipal governments can be trusted to build housing in a time of crisis, and Minister Kahlon had an interesting take on this.
The system we have at local government inherently creates the desire to say no to housing. When a proposal comes forward, very rarely do you have people that actually need the housing show up and say, yeah, this might be housing for me. They're busy, they're working. Sometimes they're not even in the community yet. But what you do have is the people that already live there who say, well, I don't want this in my neighborhood. It'll disrupt this, it'll disrupt that. So the system is heavily skewed towards the no argument. And that's why we've shifted that conversation to say, how do communities decide what is the best interest of them as a whole? And then allow for housing to be built within that plan that's been decided as a whole. I think that's a more democratic process, a more democratic way.
When the province handles it, these local level holdups can be minimized. Not eliminated, but minimized. This speeds up the development process, lessening the cost of projects and expediting the construction of housing.
But the province can also easily overlook technicalities that a local government wouldn't, like how this piece of land in Surrey was upzoned for 8 stories because Columbia Station's TOA stretches over the Fraser River, or how these smaller lots in White Rock are eligible for 6 units because they're within the frequent transit network catchment, even though the street in question is just where a busy bus happens to turn around.
You know, I would say that those kind of small issues we've been able to address. This is a challenge with making policies that are, have significant impact in the province, is you're always going to have these small one-offs. And our message to local governments has been, when there's these small one-offs, let's have a conversation. Let's figure out how we can move forward to address them. And we've been addressing them as we go.
So, can municipalities be trusted to build housing? To an extent, yes. I mean, it's not like this legislation is completely stripping cities of the ability to control their own future. It actually requires cities to refresh their official community plans every 5 years to account for change. But at the same time, working with the province can help cities avoid getting roped into hyper-specifics. At the end of the day, this legislation isn't telling anyone to build anything specifically. It's simply making it easier to build housing across the board at a time when we need it most. But even with that, it's important to remember that the build-out of these housing bills is going to take decades. A multiplex isn't built in a day, heck, a high-rise isn't built in a year. But when the whole province is working together to play their part, we've got a much better chance of making a tangible impact.
We continue to not only lead in some policies, but we're learning from other jurisdictions. And I think that's the key piece, is how do we learn from others? And that's the big focus for us as we go into this next year.
Housing policy is a perpetually evolving process, and these bills won't single-handedly solve the housing crisis. What we need is cooperation from all levels of government to permit housing in all shapes and forms, while continuing to work to develop solutions to the many other aspects of the housing crisis. We seem to treat building housing like it's smoking cigarettes, like it's some sort of unhealthy addiction that'll only end up hurting us in the future. But this is absolutely the wrong mentality. Instead, we should look at it like it's starting a healthy diet. Difficult at the start, but something that'll ultimately benefit us down the line. This is just the beginning, and it's not going to be easy, but with the right effort and attitude, we can finally start digging our way out of the housing crisis. Thank you.